and you should get an angry Zoom voice telling you that it's being recorded. So our plan today, Jared, is it okay if I just kind of like jump in and do the, okay. Um, our plan today is, yes, and closed captioning is enabled. Thank you. So is to have like kind of a quick introduction. I know a lot of you are familiar with CREP already. A lot of you have used it. So what I was going to do was show you a poster that I prepared for the Psych Terms conference last year. That's just a quick overview, some highlights of things we've done, and then get into like a little bit of icebreakers. They're not bad. They're not bad icebreakers. Some of them were written by ChatGPT, which is like, if you were at the MPA workshop, you will remember that ChatGPT did a very good job of writing very terrible icebreakers. So we're going to do that for a little bit and then do some introductions, some kind of briefer introductions here. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to have a couple folks who have already taught using CREP join us. Now, I think probably about half of you in here have also taught using CREP, maybe a third. And so we're going to have a conversation about how we've used it in our classes, different adaptations we've done, different sort of ideas. It's a little bit more informal, some of the obstacles we've run into, and then we'll take another break. And then at the end, I'm going to go through a list of the available studies. This is the same presentation that I give my class when I have them voting on which project they want to do. But I also think it's really helpful if you are an instructor who wants to pick the study your class is going to do before that semester starts, which is something that I highly encourage people to do in a lot of cases. I just had it set up in such a way that I could have my students vote on which one they wanted to do, because I teach them these classes over 2 semesters. So it's really easy to like have them vote in the first semester and then run it in the second semester. And I'll go over those kind of highlights of those. I mean, I think I've had this experience before where I've picked a CREP study to do, and then I get into it and I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do these statistics. So this is going to take a while. So I kind of have an eye on like what sorts of guidance students will need. And so like some places require an experimental hypothesis. And so there are some CREP studies that have those, blah, blah, blah. So I guess before I get into the overview of CREP, are there any logistical questions about the day or anything like that? Okay, well, feel free to use the chat. I am I guess, serial multitasker to the extent that multitasking is a real thing. I think I'm admitting that I'm neurodivergent, but that's fine. I can monitor the chat at the same time I'm talking. I'm good at neither talking nor monitoring chat, but I do them at the same time, I guess. So hat tip to cognitive psychologists there. Okay, superpower. That's funny because one of our icebreakers is about teaching and research superpowers. So, okay, let me share my screen. And if there's anything, this is pretty informal. So if there's anything that you want me to stop and sort of explain, let me know. You can jump in. I also wanted to say, I'm so sorry that Jared and I sent out duplicate invitations. I have been out of town and Jared is moving, and so we like missed each other. And so I guess multiple invitations are probably better than none at all, but okay, so here is the poster that I prepared for the Psych Terms conference. I forget what Psych Terms stands for. It's teaching research methods and statistics. The E means something. Excellence, maybe? And I presented this with our CREP employee. So for those of you who might not be aware of this, this is the end of our first year of grant funding from the NSF. And one of the things the grant funds is a 20-hour-a-week employee. So she's been really helpful on getting a lot of our like logistical issues resolved and like really kind of running things behind the scenes. Our mission statement is up here at the top. The process of how we do things on the administrative side is basically summarized here. So we pick feasible studies from 3 years prior with the most citations. The way we get our studies as part of CREP is we look in 10 different journals from 3 years prior. So every time we do this, so if we're going to do this year, we're going to look at journals from 2020, and they're sort of like the top 10 journals in different areas in psychology, based on different characteristics. So it's like psychological science, emotion, and there are 8 more. I think Psychonomic Bulletin and Review is in there. JEP General is in there. And then what we do is on Google, on Google Scholar, we look for the most cited journal articles from that year in that journal. So if we did it this year, we would be looking at the 10 most cited journal articles from Psych Science in 2020. And we try to cut out at that point, like any review papers, anything that's non-empirical. And then we compile those in a list, and we have usually students, but other people do this as well, code those papers for, would this be feasible for an undergraduate student to run in a semester? And that really gets rid of a lot of studies. Is it the best way of picking a study to replicate? Probably not, but it is a way. And then we get a list at the end of like the top 10 or so, and then the executive team goes through those and kind of ranks them in terms of like, we bring our knowledge in of like what would work well, what wouldn't work well, what complements things we already have. So if we already have like 5 social psych studies, maybe it would be good to get a study in a different content area. And then we end up with a list of available studies. We curate materials for those studies. So we contact the first authors, we ask them for their materials, if they're not already posted online. A lot of times, even if they have an open, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times because this is an N of, less than 20, but even if they have an open methods badge, we usually still have to reach out for other things as well, or we'll have questions about why they made certain decisions. And we try to not like really, just inundate them with questions. So I try to like limit my communication with them. We will ask them if they want to be part of the project, which we haven't really had anyone take us up on yet. And we also sort of in these emails, I think this is important to know about CREP, we sort of couch it in very supportive terms. Like the reason we pick the study is because we think students will be interested in it, not because we think we're going to get like a gotcha or something like that. So we curate all of that. Students do CREP projects. We review them both before and after data collection. And then this is not standardized, but we help organize authorship teams for the pooled analysis paper. And the first paper was actually done before I became executive director, and Dana, who is among us, was the first author on that paper. So maybe Dana can share a little bit of what that process was like. I wrote the second one, and I sort of took it on when some students had submitted it, got some feedback, then sort of disappeared, which was unfortunate. We don't want that to happen. So we're in the process of standardizing that a little bit more and considering like what our options might be for organizing papers in the future, including maybe instead of trying to do like a strong content paper, do data papers instead, which I think are good options. Okay, so at the time of the Psych Terms Conference in December of 2022, we had over 10 years, 440 projects started at 164 institutions in 29 countries. A lot of projects that are started don't get finished. That is a thing. So we will talk about that at some point in the workshop. We out of the 19 original studies we have replicated, 3 have been published, and 1 has been accepted as a registered replication report. 3 are being written currently. And then one of the things that I included in this poster was a sample sort of Gantt chart type thing for what a 16-week class might look like with a CREP project. And this is, it's a lot of this is variable. So we'll be talking a lot about this during the semester. or semester, sorry, during the workshops of like, how do you want to implement this? Do you have 10-week classes? Do you have 8-week classes? Like, what are the things that constrain your classes? A lot of teaching schools have very slow IRBs, and that is a huge constraint as well. So the customizations that we try to walk through with people include, like, if you have a big class, what are some ways you can do this differently? What are some ways you can adapt to having a long IRB turnaround or a short semester? If you have a novelty requirement in your department, which is, students are required to have a novel hypothesis they test. Can we get them writing direct plus or extension hypotheses on their projects? And we'll have a whole section of a workshop dedicated to writing extension hypotheses. And then do they have to have like a specific design? So is there a learning outcome, like they must do an experimental project? That's one of the customizations we do. So some additional considerations that I think are important, that I think I just try to hammer home every time I talk about CREP, is, well, specific to this workshop, extension hypotheses can be related to DEIA related questions. I'm really excited about that, that section of that workshop we're going to have. Also, and I think that this is good to bring back to departments, this model guarantees that all students in your course will do authentic research, that they will have an authentic professional experience being part of a research team, contributing data to real research that they're going to do. And I think that that's a strong argument for doing something like this. The other thing is, if you find anything here helpful at all, take it. We have, everything's open. So if you want to supervise replication, but just not CREP, or you have constraints that preclude that, you can take the step-by-step guide, you can adapt it, whatever you find of ours that is useful, use it however you want. And then think about joining the CREP team as a reviewer too. We're also, and many of you already are, we're actually paying reviewers $10 per review now. And once you know a study pretty well, they take about 15 to 30 minutes. And that's the very short attention span tour of CREP. Are any questions I can answer quickly about anything I just said? Jacob's here. Hi, Jacob. Yes, go ahead, David.
In terms of your research, the research project this is part of, you don't want us to deviate too much from the plan for this project, right?
Which project are you talking about? Are you talking about the
grant funded? I assume you're collecting data on what, student perceptions or faculty perceptions or something like that?
We are, yes, and that's one of the things that we will talk about at some point. We have, I'm trying to think if anybody in this meeting was in the study, and I don't think so. We had a grant funded study where we compared CREP projects to non-CREP projects, and we're recruiting more people for next year. You don't have to be part of that, but you can be, and I'll have more information about how you can do that. We're going to collect more data in the spring. We're just not ready to collect it in the fall. Our plan was to collect it every spring. So yes, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I guess I was, I didn't realize that this grant was specifically just for kind of the workshop and implementing it. I thought there was more of a, there was something attached this semester to data collection.
No, there isn't. And even when we do, if you want to be part of that grant, yeah, so there are two separate grants. I should make that clear. So Jared's the PI on the workshop, and I'm the co-PI. I just really like to talk a lot. We're like Jay and Silent Bob. So, and then I'm the PI on the grant that's funding the research and all that stuff. So we will at some point, I will talk to you about that. And there's also, like, that grant is funding a conference, a virtual conference over the summer that's on July 17th. That some of you might be interested in going to. But even if you join on to that, it's sort of very customizable. Like we don't have a strict protocol that's like students must pick this kind of study and do this kind of thing. Like really, they just have to do a CREP project. They have to start it. They have to finish it. They do a pre-test and a post-test. And so, yeah, that's maybe not the best research design, but it is our research design. But it belongs to us. Yeah.
Did you mention that CREP is funded by an NSF grant that's ending soon? So what will happen once the grant ends? Are there still going to be studies for students to replicate? And
yes, there were before. The grant is from 2022 to 2025. We'll be applying for other grants in the meantime, but we ran, for 10 years without a grant. Okay. Most of the stuff that we're doing now has an eye on sustainability. So like setting up a learning management system called Forma for all submissions. That's open source, it's free, just building infrastructure and stuff that will make sure it can be sustained even if we don't have money or much money in the future. So yeah, it probably won't die when we lose money because we never had money before. So everything now is just like a bonus. It's like, but it turns out I actually really like money, which I never knew as a professor. So I'm going to try to get more.
Jordan, I had a quick question. You
Yeah.
kind of hinted at that. Also, apologize for being like 5 minutes late.
That's okay.
So my bad. You quickly mentioned that like a lot of projects that get started don't finish.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like something that like maybe that's already part of the workshop of like things to avoid those factors, or like,
yep.
I guess like what is the reason projects don't finish?
There are a lot of reasons projects don't finish. By the way, half of my projects haven't been finished and I'm working on wrapping them up. So if that makes you feel any better, if you have unfinished projects. And that's one of the things that I'll, I guess, be asking you at the end of the workshop too, when we do the hackathon, is like, what would be needed for people to be not just to be motivated to finish these, but to like have the right supports to finish these, because I think it's the end of the semester, the students go off, and then you're done grading, you're preparing next semester, and like the last thing you want to do, at least this is is like do their projects for them and submit them. And it's a lot like publishing. It's like, it's not the carrot that a lot of students want. So, but we'll talk about that. It's at the front of my mind. Like one of the first things that has to be resolved is getting more people to finish. Okay. Well, I'm ahead of schedule and I don't know how to feel about that. That is not a thing that happens in my life. So Jared, do you have anything to add before I go into the icebreakers?
I don't. That was great. Well spoken.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Jared's my hype man. So let me see if I can figure out how to start my polls. Oh, there's a button called polls. Okay. So these are our first 4 icebreaker questions that were written by ChatGPT. Do you see all 4 questions here? Okay. So I had to weed out a lot of questions that ChatGPT wrote because ChatGPT thinks that psychology is all Freud, Bandura, Rogers, and Skinner. And I have thoughts about that.
Are you all able to respond to the poll? Is there an option to do so? Okay.
I don't think you can because you're the co-host.
Yeah.
So well, you can just say out loud what your choice would be.
Okay.
Isn't that fun to think about a research superpower or a teaching superpower? Oh, Logan and Marissa, you have to vote the same way. have to come to some kind of agreement. Jared, I feel like I should guess what you would answer on all of these.
I think so. I think you should too. I'll tell you if you're correct or not. That's good.
Okay. All right. I think you would, on the first one, you would pick the minds and brains one.
Yep. I mean, I
Which
teach a
one?
course called Minds, so
Minds,
yeah, that's
right,
what I would go with.
Right. Yeah, we've had that exact conversation before, which is
Hmm.
maybe ChatGPT listening in on me. Which one do you think I would pick on that one?
Oh, geez. People are weird?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Is question 4 a trick question?
No, none of them are trick questions.
It's a superpower.
I don't think ChatGPT is capable of irony. So as a language AI model, what movie would you pick?
Me?
No, I would I believe you would pick Psych Hard.
Psych Hard. Oh, geez. Yeah, that's probably good. For you,
Yeah.
I would say 51st Studies.
Oh no, definitely Psych Hard.
Okay.
I was projecting on that guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Research superpower. These are all over the board. Okay.
I feel like the first one is like Dr. Manhattan type of powers. Like they're just so powerful, they're overpowered.
Yeah, to publish the results of every study.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make participants always tell the truth is interesting. Like, I kind of feel like that would have been my choice, but I'm wondering if there are ethical implications about that because only one other person picked it.
You have superpowers, so you don't care about ethics.
You only have one
Yeah.
superpower. Yeah.
I
Yeah, I know,
almost
but like if
picked
you have
that,
superpowers, why would you care about ethics? I know it's not very good to hear it from an IRB member, but
Unlimited participants does sound delightful. I'm guessing Jared would pick speed up IRB applications.
No, publish the results of every study.
No questions asked. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Why did we think that number 4 was a trick question?
None of them are even remotely possible.
Right,
That's
but
why
this
it's a
It's a superpower, right? I think Jared would have picked the grading one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grading's the worst, isn't it? Yeah.
Sometimes it's great. So like when a student writes like a 12-page essay about William James and accidentally calls them James Brown every single time. That's like top 10 moments in teaching. Okay. Thank you all for participating in that. I don't know if I feel like I know anything more about you, but that was fun for me. So let's do the CREP icebreakers. These are less icebreakers and more just information, kind of what are you interested in learning? Have you used CREP before? Can you see how many people answer each question as well? Oh gosh, so you can't see the results. Okay. I'm sorry.
You can share them. I think you have
Okay.
that superpower to share them.
Yeah.
That's a superpower. We're talking a lot about superpowers. So I'll give folks a minute to go through here. But basically, I'm just trying to figure out, how many of you have used CREP before? I think I have a good grasp on who has. But I wanted other people to see this, and then what types of courses you're thinking about using these in.
Can everybody see the new poll that we've launched?
Yeah, there are people filling it out.
I like that the fourth question was again a trick one. Yes,
what
no,
way?
maybe.
Well, so, and I added maybe because when I've asked people this before, they're like, kind of like students did a replication as part of their thesis project, but it wasn't like the focus of their thesis project. So also I wrote these 37 minutes ago. So, you probably can use some of these as examples of bad survey questions. Take my name off of them first. Put Jared's name on them. Okay. All right. Are there folks still working on these? I think. Okay. I see that 12 out of 12 have participated. So we are evenly split on 6 have used CREP before and 6 have not. So that is great. The courses that people are thinking about, let me end the poll and then see if I can share it. Okay, great. Independent research and theses, it is sort of leading the way with where you'd implement these, followed by research methods and statistics. It's sort of what I anticipated. Somebody did select intro psych, and we've never actually had an intro psych class do this before, and I love that. Jared has thought about doing that. So let's for sure talk about that. And so I think the independent research and theses, there are definitely arguments that those should be replication projects, which is great. Okay, and then most excited about in the workshop, sort of processing these as I'm reading them. Jesse, did you get booted? Did we boot you? Okay. Nobody selected other. Okay. Meeting other instructors, working on the manuscript, hearing from other instructors. Less excited about the individualized guidance, which is good feedback. So less excited about contributing to the teaching materials in the hackathon. But using CREP in general and mentoring the extension hypotheses are pretty high. So that's great. Do you want to see the results of the other icebreakers that ChatGPT wrote? Okay. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. It's not letting me. I think I have to stop sharing this one. And then, here we go. Okay. People are weird. Only 2 people picked psych hard. It makes me sad. Yeah, grading. I need to feed this back to ChatGPT at some point and just be like, this is what people actually said. Okay. Can I stop sharing that one? Okay. So the next thing we have on our schedule is just introductions for all of us. Where we're from, we're going to try to keep them relatively brief. You know, where you're from, maybe what were the things we were going to ask people to do?
Yeah, so topics of classes and your scholarly interests in less than 4 words.
That's 3 words. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm taking notes on my iPad. I'm not playing Pokemon Go right this minute. Jacob called me out in the meeting once because he heard the noise in the background. He was like, "Is that Pokemon Go?" I'm like, "Yes, it is." Okay, so I will sort of start with the folks who I guess came into the Zoom meeting in the order they came in. So I'll start with Carol. Where are you from? Topics, classes you would implement CREP in, and your scholarly interests.
Okay, I'm assuming not all of that is in less than 4 words, but
no, right,
just the last part. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Carol. You, I'm from Covenant College in Lookout Mountain, Georgia, which is near Chattanooga, Tennessee. If anybody's near there, come see Rock City. It's down the street from where I live and where our college is. I have tried implementing CREP in my research methods class last fall. I'm one of the people that did not all the way finish. Sorry, but I am looking forward to learning more and maybe hopefully pushing that data somewhere through this. Scholarly interests, memory, metacognition.
Nice. That was 3 words. I don't know. I'm not holding that tight to the 4-word barrier. Ellen?
Hi, Ellen Perfinger, Virginia Commonwealth University. I met Carol like 2 weeks ago, maybe at the Psych1 conference, and Amanda's name looks familiar, and Jesse and I have some interconnections there. My class, or a portion of my class, participated in CREP last spring. It was a learning cognition class, but we did not submit our data, so I guess we would also be in that incomplete column, but it was a huge success, and I collected data about science identity and got some statistically significant results, so that was exciting. I will continue. I'll do it with my learning and cognition classes again in the spring. And my scholarly interests are SOTL, and I'm all gung-ho excited about using Oppenheimer's idea of students opting in for mandatory attendance, giving them autonomy.
I love that. That's fantastic. Okay, Dana, I think you're next.
Okay, so let's see. I'm from Texas A&M University in Texarkana, Texas. And but I live in Arkansas. I'm in Texarkana, Arkansas. It's a border city. So yep. And let's see. I am planning to do it in my research methods class this fall. And my scholarly interests, peace, justice, and social cognition.
Nice. Oh, Anton got his first speeding ticket in Arkansas. That's good. That is what stuck out to me. You have to be going pretty fast to get a speeding ticket in Arkansas. So I think that's my hypothesis. Okay.
Well, the way that things work. So especially if you're on one of the US highways or state highways, you'll be going along just fine at 65 miles an hour. And then the speed limit will suddenly go to 35 because you're coming into a town and there's just no way to slow down. So you get a ticket.
That's frustrating. That's so poor Anton. Okay, next I have Marissa and Logan. I don't know how you want to divide this up, but whichever wants to go first.
Marissa leads. Hi, I'm Marissa. We're at Rockhurst University in Kansas City. Fun fact, Lisa was my graduate school mentor. She's the one who told me about this. So good to see you, Lisa. Okay, wait, I forgot the things. Topics of classes. Okay. So we have a research class, right, that students can sign up for credit. And so I think that's probably where I'd use something like this. Yeah, I like the idea of using it in cognition though, because I've had trouble having projects. Sometimes I have the class do their own data there and that doesn't work out so well, use the class as the participants. And sometimes they get confused about that. Anyways, that's my own issue. But so yeah, probably more of an independent kind of research credit class. Scholarly interests in less than 4 words. Okay, Logan told me to use my lab name, which is SLAM. Sleep, learning, attention, and memory. But I also do some okay.
We probably should have said 4 seconds or less. So because you can get a lot of words out in 4 seconds.
Okay, I'm just gonna take
this time.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, hi, everybody. I'm Logan. I'm also at Rockhurst University in Kansas City. I'm considering using, I thought this was called CREP, not CREPE, so I'm gonna probably say the wrong thing the whole time. But I'm gonna implement CREPE in hopefully, definitely the independent study classes, and maybe my stats class and or my I have a close relationship seminar coming up in the spring. I'd really like to see it implemented there potentially. My scholarly interests, studying close relationships.
Nice. Okay, cool. Big Missouri contingent here. All right. I have Shelby next. And by the way, Shelby and Jesse, you were the first 2 applicants for the workshop. And this was before I asked for the name and email address. And I found you from the information that you put on the form. Like, no, wait, I don't think, actually it was Alana.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
Alana.
my
Oh, that's
my
okay.
first name.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I guess
you're
I'll
good.
say that I have a confusing name situation where I usually go by Shelby, but yeah, my name pops up as Alana. And I guess
Right.
now you know a lot about me from reconstructing who I was. But I'm at Texas Women's University. I actually just finished my first year. So that's in Denton, Texas, so the north part of DFW. Classes I want to implement CREPE in, which I also have been mispronouncing in my head. I definitely planning to implement in my experimental psych course in the fall. Interested in the possibility of doing it in statistics, though I don't know. Again, I'm new, so what courses I'm teaching are still sometimes a bit of a mystery, but if I teach stats again, I would be interested in implementing there, and then possibly content courses like social. I'm also doing a like close relationship seminar class, but in I think the spring after next, so I have a lot of time for that, so maybe that as well. And my research interests are, let's see, the name of my lab is too long, and sometimes I forget what the letters stand for. So I'll just say social relationships help crossover.
Nice. I kind of spaced out for a second and looked off because I'm trying to think about which studies would be appropriate for a close relationships class, which I have never taught or even thought about much. So when we talk about the available studies, you may help maybe educate me a little bit on what's taught in that class. We can kind of see if we have anything right now that would work. Okay, Mona, are you available? Okay.
Yes,
May
I
come
am.
back. Oh, good. Okay. Cool. No, that's okay.
Yeah, so I teach at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, where it gets really, really, really cold in the winter, but it's lovely in the summer, except for mosquitoes. The course I've implemented CREPE in is the research methods. I find it's the course that gives the students the most time to finish projects. I can imagine implementing it in other courses I teach, like psych and culture, but the time would be a big issue since the course topic is not the research itself. So that would be hard to kind of guide them through the projects if we're focusing on other topics. Research interests, SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, especially focused on social justice.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Lisa?
Hi, everyone. I'm from St. Louis University. I know Marissa. I'm Marissa. Hi, Logan. We met at MPA this year, and it's really been interesting with CREPE. I also say CREP in my head, even though I know it's CREPE, but there should be an E on the end for it to be a CREPE. But I've been using CREPE studies in my research lab. So our undergraduate program has over 300 majors. We also have about that many neuroscience majors, so about 700 students is who we serve in our undergraduate program. And you can imagine a lot of them want research experience. And in order to give them that, I developed a new lab. It's called a collaborative undergraduate Billiken behavior lab, where students can join and gain research experience. The goal was to have replication studies. And I just happened to stumble upon CREP when I was doing research on replication studies. I think, Jordan, one of your papers caught our eye, and then from there, that was the end of it. So we've done 3 CREP studies. We haven't wrapped anything up. So we've got 3 open studies that we need to wrap up, possibly this fall, maybe sooner. And so yeah, that's what we're doing. My research interests, I think at this point in my career, I feel like I'm on the other side of the hill, of my career. So in 4 words, I would say student engagement and research.
Same. Okay, thank you. Anton, I have you next.
Thank you. I am Anton Leontiev. I am from Concordia University, Wisconsin. I am planning to implement CREP in probably in the directed research, like a research seminar, research methods class, and hopefully intro, if I manage to swing it. Also, I'm on Team Blue in Pokemon Go.
Yeah, me too, obviously.
That's the best team, okay, of course.
Yeah. Jacob.
Hello, folks. Currently I'm in Alabama, but I'll only be in Alabama for 3 more days as I just graduated. So starting a faculty position in NorCal, so the Bay Area. Pretty excited for that. I wasn't sure what to put as an involvement in CREP. I put no, just because like I'm a reviewer, but like I actually haven't used it as like a mentor. So I'm just like, I don't know that type of experience. I don't know. As far what the questions are, let me scroll all the way up because I have short-term memory. Classes I'd like to implement CREP in, based on what I'm told, for these coming semesters, my course load's really going to be teaching like social psych. So upper div courses there, research seminars, as well as an experimental methods course. And I'd like to use CREP. You all pronounced it like, or CREP, I think CREP, like the soft E. In my head, when I first learned about it, I always pronounced it creep. But then I'm like, it's probably not that, because I thought it was a bit creepy. But those are the classes I'm trying to implement in, and I'm excited for that. And as far as scholarly interest in 4 words, I would say pedagogy, politics, humility, and then I'm going to cheat and say meta-science as a single word. But that's
That is a single word.
Yeah, meta-science.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Jacob. And good luck as you're moving. I guess, are you going to be participating in this workshop as you're moving?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll get to see several different backgrounds.
All the
That's
place, yeah.
exciting. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Bill.
Hey, I'm Bill Chopek. I'm an associate professor at Michigan State. Like Jacob, I'm a reviewer, but I was doing it back when I was doing it for free. So I feel like an idiot. Was not paid, which is fine. Just kidding. But yeah, I'm really excited about the workshop. I teach like a 250 person class and a really small one, like a 5-person one, and a 25-person one. So can get a little creative. I'm probably mostly looking forward to like my lab, which has like 20 or 25 people. So maybe forming teams and doing studies together. That's kind of what we've been successful doing in the past with kind of getting students involved. So yeah, very new to CREP, but kind of I've been in the sphere a long time. I've been a big fan for a long time and looking forward to kind of integrating it into my life. And research interests are close relationships, change, personality, and that's it. Thank you.
Nice. CREP is fine. CREP is totally like, I kind of want to go back to that for a second. I don't know if any of you have watched What We Do in the Shadows, but when we talk about like writing up manuscripts, I always call them creepy papers. So yeah, creepy paper. Yeah. Oh, and also Bill, you may notice Bill's name from, if any of you have like read the when and how to teach undergrads about replication, you know, that's a great one. Classic replication paper. Okay. Amanda.
Hi, my name's Amanda Woodward. I'm at the University of Minnesota now, and tried to use CREP in an open science class last semester. So we'll probably try to do that in the spring, as well as add it to my statistics class. And then 4 words for research would be SOTL, social cognition, and belonging.
Nice. Okay, and Jessie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie. I am at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. I have 0 experience with implementing replication in the classroom, but have long wanted to and just have not had the resources to make that happen. I'm anticipating using this in my research methods class in the fall. Hoping to use it as sort of independent study type of thing. And then I teach a neurodiversity seminar as a capstone senior seminar. And I think there could be some really interesting potential implementing it in that class. And my research interests, I'm going to say neurodiversity, mental health, families.
Nice. Have you read the Fort preprint on neurodiversity in academia?
No, but now I will.
Oh gosh, it's so good. It's so good. Jacob, are you on that paper? Okay, all right. I know that Jacob's involved in Fort. I'm going to send it to you because it's
Please
like
do.
I send it to everybody who. It's so good. Okay, so a lot of things that I'm kind of picking up on here, we're going to sort of talk about. I noted, Amanda, you said you tried to use CREP in your class. I think that, you know, the first couple times you do it, I hear the word try a lot. And just know that like your priority is always going to be teaching, you know, CREP, like we're here to support. And even if projects don't finish, usually what we do when we write up papers is reach out to whoever has ever signed up for the project and just say, you know, maybe you didn't get the completion certificate, but do you have data in a code book that we can, or even an effect size, like something that we can use to write up our paper. And we've had pretty good luck with that. People generally have the data somewhere. I have things in my head that we can kind of do to maybe make the process a little bit easier for people instead of having like a full results write up, maybe have like a questionnaire people can fill out where they're like, you know, what are your variables? How many participants did you get? Where's your raw data? Blah, blah, blah. So that's something to keep in mind during the teaching hackathon is like, if you have in your head, like something that would make it easier for people to complete projects, that is definitely a place where I think folks could contribute. No, and I get the word try is like, I mean, I feel like I've done the same thing and then I have like some guilt from it. That's like, so maybe I may be projecting that a little bit where I'm like, oh, of all people, I should have wrapped up my great project. But, you know, we've had instructors also like set out to do great projects and then have to like pivot because, you know, the group projects weren't going well or IRB took too long or, you know, unfortunately in a couple of cases, like our reviews took a little bit too long and we try, you know, first priority is always the student and their learning. But, you know, we kind of try to do the best we can and just keep pushing that little boulder up that little hill. It's like forever. Okay, so we have a few extra minutes to answer if you have any questions right now or anything. Let me open it up.
What do you think are the things that students struggle with the most in CREP projects?
Yeah, I would love to just turn around and sort of open that up to other people who have used CREP too, because I think I have something in my mind, and I'd love to hear what other people think.
So, so I don't know if there's space here to talk about IRB issues. But that the technical aspects of IRB can throw students off if they're not given enough time to work through the process. One thing I learned through our IRB, which I didn't know last fall, is that I think all of the CREP studies that we did could have been passed through as exempt protocols. That's the lowest level of review. For whatever reason, I just assumed they had to be expedited, and I made that sort of strategic mistake. So I think one way to kind of alleviate some of that, I think that hang up is very real. Like once you can get around that, like students seem to be pretty good about staying on board. Or at least that's been my experience. Yeah, so talk to your IRB first. And the irony is I'm on the IRB, right? So that's, that's the sad part of all this. And so I just didn't think about asking, and I just went about things a difficult way. I think that, and also I think students, sometimes it depends on their skills. So we were trying to do things in a single semester last fall, and that was really stressful, I think, for everyone. We were well staffed, so we got through the semester okay, but I think time is really something that students really struggled with.
Yeah, those. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I would agree with the time issue. And this, I don't know if it's a student issue or a me issue, probably both. But when they're doing the replication, like getting them to the point where they kind of understand, replicating is important, but then that they still need to understand the conceptual basis of the paper and the study itself, so that they're not just kind of plug and chugging. But then that if I had them do extension hypotheses as well, but that they still had to actually do that first direct replication, and that was important, and that the extension should extend, not just be random. So I think that was one thing. And then another, just making sure they're kind of interested in it. And that's kind of a basis. I think all the studies I looked at were pretty interesting. So that wasn't a huge issue to get them on board enough, but probably that general stuff with replication.
Yeah, we've struggled with IRB as well, and I can kind of share, there are a lot of schools that also or institutions that if an IRB has been approved somewhere else, they will sort of count that as approval because it's multi-site. So if you're one of those institutions, we usually do have, we have been trying to get everybody who's an executive reviewer to at least get IRB approved through their institution, or get it approved through Avila, who still does full review for everything. I would have said, honestly, what students struggle with the most, and every student population is different, is extension hypotheses. I mean, they're just really that I'm really excited about that part of the workshop because I want to be better at that. But just understanding the theory behind the paper and understanding like what would extend it, and looking for like what's updated it. And I would love for students to be able to do that at every level, but especially at the thesis level. And Jesse, what you mentioned, this has happened, I think, several times, is, people have had to move forward with their projects. And so but then they cannot share the data, right? Because it's a class project at that point, if you do it before the IRB. So there are some potential solutions to that, including picking the study ahead of the semester and doing the IRB paperwork. I, based on some of the work that I've done, don't think that research methods instructors generally consider IRB to be an essential piece of what their students need to complete in order to achieve the learning outcomes for the class. That might be the case for some, especially thesis work, but yeah, the extension hypotheses are just really interesting. We'll have more time to talk about this as well. I'm going to go ahead and let us take our first break now, and then we'll come back at 11:15. We'll come back in 15 minutes. I'm going to pause the recording, and then we'll have our conversation about CREP with our guest speakers. So I'll see you in a little bit.
Associate professor we're being recorded.
Yep, sorry.
In Rolla, Missouri, at Missouri University of Science and Technology. And I teach the research methods class. And so, I don't know, a while ago, maybe like 5 years ago, I was listening to a podcast that talked about enclosed cognition, where if you put on a lab coat, it helps you do better at the Stroop test. And I'm like, does it? Does it really? And so I had my class do a replication of it, and then emailed all my friends from grad school and got like 3 or 4 other people to do their own replications, because I didn't know CREP existed yet. And, and so we did our own little replication. And my favorite thing about that was learning about like equivalence testing, where you kind of like flip the null hypothesis significance test and try and prove that effects can't be any larger than some small value. And so you can never prove there's zero effect, but you can prove that no one should care about it. And so that's what we tried to do. So that was interesting. But then I found out about CREP and have been doing those projects ever since. So I've got, I don't know, I think we've done 3 or 4 of them now in my research methods class. And the way I do it is our entire class does one project, but we throw in like 4 or 5 different extra extensions. And each student is responsible for writing their own paper, and they can pick whatever 3 hypotheses they want to test. And so everybody's is a little bit different, so it doesn't get as boring to read 20 copies of the same thing. But it's still using the same data set. So like I did all the data cleaning for them and just gave them a kind of like ready to go data set to use. But that's been working pretty well for me. And we haven't gotten to see any of the meta-analyses come out from any of the projects we've contributed to yet. So that's the part that I'm anxious to see, but it's been fun.
Yeah, great, thank you. And people probably have questions for you already. Let me have Brady introduce himself, and then maybe we can open up to questions, or people can jump on to talk about how they use CREP as well. So Brady?
Yeah, I'm Brady Wiggins. I'm a professor of psychology at Brigham Young University, Idaho, here in Eastern Idaho. So I became involved with CREP as our psych program was undergoing a bit of a transition with adopting a senior research course. So we had our standard research methods course, but we wanted to implement a second course, which involved a research experience. We're a primarily teaching institution, and we just don't have the resources or support for faculty to have enough of an independent research program to support the students getting the experience that they might need going toward graduate school. So by putting it into the curriculum, this is how we were going to accomplish that. And so another colleague had piloted the course as an elective. And we are an open enrollment university. So we've got a pretty wide range of students. And so the pilot really was run with who you would expect to sign up for that course. The students that were highly motivated, These are the ones that were doing the stats minor. And I inherited the course as we were going to a required course for the entire major. And so I was really scrambling, trying to figure out how can we have a research experience that is high quality, that produces useful data. Because even with these cream of the crop students, we had great educational experience, but poor scientific quality. And I feel an ethical obligation to our participants to not waste their contribution on just educating. Not that that's a small thing, but they signed up to participate in science. So in my scramble, I was introduced to CREP. One of my friends who had been involved with the open science collaboration, he was connected with John Gray and told me about CREP. So you should check this thing out. And so I got connected with CREP and got my students signing up for CREP projects. We had them working in groups, and John gave me the distinction of having broken CREP. We flooded them with more projects than they had gotten in any one semester. And so it was kind of an inflection point where we had to figure out how can we scale this up. And so John, being the resourceful person that he is, put me to work on CREP. And it's been such a phenomenal resource. I'll save most of the details for questions that you might have, but I've been at this, I'd say at least 7 years now. And I teach 3 full semesters a year with 1 to 2 sections of this course per year. So that gives you a sense of how I could break CREP with how many we have to run. So I've been navigating, how do we set up groups so that everybody's getting a good experience, the least prepared, the most prepared student? How do we manage our subject pool so that we can get efficient use of our resources? One of the things that I've done over these years, I currently use CREP a little bit less, and I'm trying to rethink how to come back to CREP. But I think there are a few bottlenecks that, for our purposes, have been a challenge to fit into our semester. And so I think I see a little bit better some of the ways that CREP really fits some intentions. And what I've done right now, what I'm doing is that I have a CREP-like experience, but we have a 13-week semester. We're going from 0 to poster presentation in those 13 weeks. And so every bottleneck of the review process, the IRB process, and the high level of documentation that CREP allows us to do, that has proved to be an obstacle for the way that I've had my classes set up. And so I identify student-friendly studies, and basically I've just taken from CREP how to do a replication, and I do that in my classes. And so I've kind of done that on both sides, and I think I have a pretty good sense of how I would use CREP in what situations, where I would learn from CREP the way that I've been doing now. So I'd be glad to talk about any of those things.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. That is a lot of, I think, really great experience. I know that I have a question in mind for you, but let me see if anybody else has questions before I jump into mine. Lisa, go ahead.
thought I'd use the raise hand feature. Hi, Devin. Hi, Brady. St. Louis University here. I'm curious about the diversity of student preparation and motivation and how you've managed that in your groups, even with prerequisites for courses, as we know, that doesn't always mean that students are entering on, on a level playing field. And we get students who are highly motivated, unmotivated, unprepared. So how did you assemble the groups so that students can maximize their experience and their learning, and so that you don't end up with a group who is troubled by lack of experience or motivation?
Well, I don't do groups, so.
Okay, so I'll take that one. I come at it with a few different considerations. So I select what studies I am willing to supervise ahead of time for that semester. And I ask students to sign up with preferences. I also do a beginning of semester survey, just asking, I'll tweak it every semester, but usually something about what is their statistical experience? Do they have any beyond our one required course in the major? And that usually tells me a lot more than just that, about who they are and what their preparation is. I'll ask them about, what do they feel they're most prepared to bring? What do they feel most anxious about? And I'll ask them about previous group work experiences. What role do they tend to play? And I'm concerned about two things: the social loafer and the control freak. And because a lot of times those line up with those ends of the spectrum of preparation. Either I never knew that psychology meant numbers. I resent having to take this in the first place, or I've got to get into this competitive program and nobody's going to get in my way. And so based on their interests and their preparation, I try to get a good mix. Anytime that students express a preference to work with somebody, I've found that to be a good thing to honor. That usually that means there's going to be some harmony and cooperation, or if they tell me there's someone that they don't want to work with, that's tended to be a good thing to honor as well. But the biggest thing has been group size. If I see 5 as the absolute maximum, and 4 is my sweet spot. You can disappear in a group of 5 if you really want to. With a group of 4, it just stands out enough when someone isn't showing up, or if someone's particularly introverted, maybe willing to make a contribution, but they have to be invited. And then I try to coach and monitor along the way how that process is going. The way that I grade them on the project is I give an overall grade on the entire thing. And so I have it broken up into small steps, but my objective is that we are going to do a high quality study. And so when I say this is due at this day, if it's not at the quality we need, then it's not done. And I just help them push it through to high quality. So that's already a given, that we are going to end up with high quality data that we can share on the OSF. But I am monitoring and documenting their contributions, and I'm having them document their own and their group members' contributions. And so I tell them every project is going to be 100%. And that's my most common grade that I give on the project. But you get to demonstrate to me whether you did a contribution that's 100%. And so along the way in the semester, there's a lot of opportunities to encourage them to compensate for maybe a dip at a certain point in the semester. I've had students give birth during a semester, have a parent die, some of these sorts of things. And this has allowed me a lot of flexibility to be appropriately compassionate. And I think it's a nice analog to the way that we do research in teams, and with the contributions happening sometimes unevenly, but hopefully fairly and appropriately attributed. So yeah, that's kind of the nutshell of how I approach the groups, and making sure I'm there to hold a hand when I need to, and to make up any difference in a group that might need that gap bridged. But we're gonna do a high quality project no matter what. That motivated student is gonna get the experience they want and need. And the least prepared student, the lower motivated student, gets to take the class. If they are motivated but less prepared, they get a whole lot of support and scaffolding.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I know Bill has a question as well. I wanted to ask really quick, Brady, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, if you have things put together that you have used in your class, like the ways they document their work, anything that you've referenced, can you send that to me so I can put it on the OSF page for this workshop, just if it's accessible? I know that I don't tend to have these accessible, so if not, it's totally fine.
I have a few things that I can share. A lot of it is kind of informally happening, but I could make some notes of that over the next week or two, and we could add that.
That would be really, really helpful. I wanted to mention too, that one of the things that Brady helps with a lot is like implementing different types of projects given like different constraints. And I'm correct in saying this, right, Brady? Like when somebody needs to put a program into like an open source thing, you've been really helpful at like developing those materials and helping answer questions on stuff like that as well. Okay, Bill, sorry for dumping in there.
No, not at all. Thanks both of you for coming, and appreciate your time and kind of giving us your experiences. I was really curious about the extension where you kind of plan this out of the box kind of replication attempt, but then they want to add some like new flavor to it that's specific to their interest maybe, or maybe your interest or your shared interests. Can you tell me A, if you've done that, B, if you like it, and then C, if you have any advice for making it as successful as it can be?
Yeah, this is kind of the way that what I do instead of having different groups do different CREP projects is that, we all do one CREP project, but we add lots of different extensions to it. And so early on in the semester, like maybe even the second week, I've had everybody read the paper already. And then I make everybody do like a literature search so that they can all try and see what else has been done since the CREP project, or, leading up to it, or, get other ideas that way. And then we have a big discussion board where everybody suggests different things that they think would be interesting. Like, so this last one we did was Sparkman and Walton looking at dynamic norms and trying to get people to eat more vegetarian kind of stuff. And some people wanted to look into personality characteristics. Other people wanted to know whether knowing if you grew up in an urban environment changed things. Some other people wanted to know, if you have experience kind of hunting and fishing, that might change your relationship to eating meat. We made a new scale on like trendiness, like how much people like to kind of get ahead of trends and things, thinking that that might be relevant. And so we added in maybe like 7 different things that we thought might be interesting. And then, each student kind of picked their own favorite 3 hypotheses to test. And so that was the way we did it. It's just by, also it's nice because we can do a whole class worth of experiments and only use up 1 half hour from 100 intro psych students. So we're not hogging the subject pool too much.
Yeah, when it comes to extensions, and I'll also address what you just did, Devin, about the economy of participants. With my particular situation with my students, I've found extensions to be a little bit challenging, partly because I am doing multiple different projects. And so the level of supervision that it requires when we add in something new, it just really starts to multiply. So if you are doing multiple projects, that's one thing to consider there. Where I've found it working well for my students is if the statistics that we're beginning with are rather simple, and the extension that they want to add doesn't complicate testing that new hypothesis in any way that's going to be beyond our ability to hammer out during that semester. So I'll give you an example of an extension that we've really had some success with. This one isn't a CREP project, but we did a replication of a Psych Science article, Anger Damns the Innocent, where they're testing how guilty do participants judge a person when they respond angrily to an accusation versus responding calmly. And the original study found that an angry response appears more guilty than a calm response. They tested it across 2 presentations of a scenario, one where the person is accused of stealing from their employer, and another where they're accused of cheating on their partner. And so we've got pretty simple stats here, right? And we had a group, I always throw it open as an option if they want to do an extension, but I warn them against the complications because we've got to justify this hypothesis that it's worth testing. And we need to make sure we can run the stats. So we had a proposal for testing the gender of the accused. Is the accusation of an angry or calm woman going to be judged differently than the accusation of an angry or calm man? And that one was pretty low-hanging fruit, both in terms of the literature review and what it added to our statistics. And so I find that for my situation, something like that works well. But in most cases, I find that my students will come up with an idea that's half-baked enough, and I'm spread thin enough across these different projects within a 13-week semester that we just don't pursue it. The other thing is that most of my students are in their last or second to last semester. And it's pretty limited how many of them go on to present their results beyond sharing them on the OSF. That really has been our primary tool for disseminating our findings. And so I think that if we are seeing follow through, whether it's for trying to publish, presenting at a research conference, that's where I think these extensions get really exciting. If our main target is a poster. And so if they're writing up the full paper and have time to really work that out, I think the extension gets exciting there. Brief comment on the economy of participants. I limit myself to 4 to 5 projects per semester. And so if I'm teaching multiple sections, I will have 2 groups on the same study. And I make sure that I am just coordinating their preparation so that when we go to data collection, it's the same study, but that they don't have to coordinate with one another. In early days, I had them coordinate across sections and it was a total mess. Now I have another of my colleagues who teaches the class. Sometimes we'll have 3-4 different groups, all, they're doing that project, but we have one data set. And with COVID, we had to go to all online studies. I've stayed with that because part of what we figured out, some of these replications can be done in 5-10 minutes. And so I use Qualtrics to bundle together the 3, 4, or 5 studies. And I've programmed it to randomly present the order of the studies. Sometimes we'll create more than one bundle, or we'll have 2 studies where they randomly get one or the other, and then the other ones, just depending on where we might have a problem with the 2 studies appearing together. But that has allowed us to take what is essentially 30 to 40 minutes of participant time and end up with 4 to 5 projects, each with anywhere between 300 to 500 responses, depending on our intro psych enrollment for that semester.
Thanks. There are some really helpful ideas. Jessie.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this information. It's really helpful. I'm brand new to this. And so all of these are like little gems. One of the things I'm curious about is what you do to help facilitate versus what you have the students do as part of the learning experience. So for example, like you've mentioned, I do the data cleaning, or maybe this is a little bit of an inference, Brady, but it seems like you do the setting up of Qualtrics as opposed to the students doing it. And so I'm curious sort of if you have thoughts or examples or suggestions of sort of like what I should be doing versus the students should be doing.
Devin, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so ours are pretty different for sure. It's nice to get these different range of experiences. So in mine, in different semesters, sometimes there's been a CREP project that I want to do, and so I'll just pick it ahead of time. In other semesters, I've let students read several different ones and vote on which one we've done. But I've been the one to submit the IRB. I've been the one to actually assemble it in Qualtrics. Sometimes I've had an honors student help with some of these little tasks if there's someone who's more kind of wanting to be deeply involved. And I'll handle the data collection and cleaning and then just give it to the students. And then we have a lab portion of our research methods class where we'll help them run whichever analyses are appropriate for the hypotheses that they've picked. And usually there's only 7 or 8 different hypotheses that everybody else is mixing together, but there's always some people coming up with really weird ones that are special and different. And it's nice to let some people do multiple regression models while other people are sticking with 3 t-tests or something like that. I will then pick 1 or 2 of the students who wrote the best papers and have them help me submit the final results to CREP. And then I always have 1 student present our results at a regional conference, MPA in Chicago, where a couple years I've had a student actually give a talk, but otherwise they'll give a poster or something, and that'll come the next year. And so there's some wiggle room for more motivated students to kind of be more involved. But there's a lot that I'm doing too, probably compared to, students seem like they're carrying more of the weight in Brady's class.
Yeah, I try to give a safety net. so what I was saying earlier about we're going to have these projects be 100% quality. I am ready to make sure that what actually goes out to participants is going to be solid, that the data that we post to the OSF is going to be solid. And that's particularly the case right now where we're not going through CREP review and that sort of thing. I feel that much more of a burden of responsibility to keep that quality control. But most things I give to the students to at least make an attempt at. And where I have multiple groups on the same project, we're only going to have one IRB submission. We're only going to have one Qualtrics, but everybody's going to draft answers to the IRB application. Everyone is going to create a draft of the Qualtrics. And sometimes I end up using one of the Qualtrics that the students created. Sometimes I use the one that I've got in my back pocket all ready to go. I use a lot of the survey flow programming. We've got some pretty complex ones where you can do some wild stuff with the survey flow. And so I will coach the students pretty closely, and ideally I will already have a version of it ready to go when it's a pretty complex one. I will give them a peek at what I've created, and kind of similar to the replication idea generally, trying to reverse engineer what they've gotten from somebody else. They learn a ton in the process. I've had a few that are really complex. I will share a copy of my Qualtrics with them and have them create their own. And even if they were trying to mindlessly copy it, there's no way they're going to get it without errors until they understand every little bit of that. So the piece that I do handle myself and don't hand over to them with the Qualtrics is that bundling survey that I make that stitches them all together and assigns the order of the studies. That's not internal to any of the projects, and usually is beyond what the students want to learn to do. But yeah, so for just about everything, I try to give them as much as I can for them to jump in, play around in the sandbox. But then when it comes to quality control, I am ready with a safety net for wherever there's a gap between what we can accomplish within our constraints and what quality demands.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think I've talked to both of you about the models that I use as well. And Ellen, I've spent a lot of time talking to Ellen about this too. I really try to focus on what do I think the students need to leave this class knowing how to do, and then what can they reasonably do. So if any of you have done the Cameron et al., it's very complicated. It relies on like 40 trials. Oh, Ellen, we had fun talking. And like, I don't have the version of Qualtrics that has a timer, and there was a timer in the original study. So I programmed everything on SOSI survey with the help of ChatGPT, helping me like write JavaScript and stuff like that. And a lot of times I will, like, again, like Devin does, I'll pull a student in that can help with some of this stuff. And one of the things I tell them is like in my head, eventually I'll have a credit taxonomy type thing where like they fill out a questionnaire at the end of the semester and let me know what work they did. But I tell them, like, on the OSF page, I'll rearrange your names in order of authorship. And when we go to do the write-up, like, we will cite your OSF page. And so if you did a bunch of the work and you're the first author on the OSF page, like, those are a type of citation for you. And then I'm like the last author on that OSF page eventually. So I think that was a little helpful this year in getting a couple people motivated to do things. Sorry, Dana, I just wanted to jump in and share some of that too. Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
Sorry, and this may have been answered because I arrived late. So you're talking about collecting data from participants and using intro psych participant pools. So my experience with intro psych participant pools is, we get the keeners at the beginning that respond, and do their experiments at the beginning of the semester. And then there's that dip in the middle of the semester, and then the last minute people come in toward the end of the semester. So using participant pools seems a little bit risky in terms of being able to get enough data to work with the students on the stats and so on. That versus, I guess, having the students do some kind of informal recruitment. And does that create problems for the sampling and the population in CREP? So any general ideas on one way versus the other, or how to manage that end of semester procrastination participant set?
For mine, we have kind of a unique situation that may or may not match some of your universities, where we have such a strong teaching emphasis. We don't really have competing projects that are outside of the rhythm of our research class for when the opportunities are available. And so there's about a 2 to 3 week window, about 2/3 into the semester, when we have these projects ready to roll. We don't have a SONA system. I manage all of this. And so I've got a survey where everybody signs up to get email announcements. I've got a Google Doc where we list the available studies. And when we send out emails, we send them to that Google Doc. And then we just are careful to cap the different opportunities so that the first study available doesn't suck up all of the available participants. But then we've gotten I think almost all of our intro psych instructors really on board with the department requirement for research participation. We've prepared alternative assignments for them and tried to make it as unburdensome on them, so that when we are putting out these announcements, this window is open, that they really push that. That's getting into their announcements, like now's the time. They don't need to advertise any one study. And so that has helped us to get pretty good numbers. But it's really because of that unique circumstance. This is all that's coming at that entire pool. In early days, we had, the first versions of the class, every student was designing their own study. They were doing their own recruiting, and we'd have these studies with 20, 30 participants total, not even split across groups. And so, good education, bad science was kind of where it ended up. And it was disruptive to all of the people that they were hassling to get participants. And so we opted to take charge of that piece of the process, and instead emphasize what taking control has gotten for us from that. Oh, I will say in the past though, I have used, we did ads on Facebook for a while. We had a little bit of money to put towards that. I used mTurk. It's just a little bit less controlled for what I'm trying to accomplish in such a small time frame. Facebook has become more controversial and messy anyway for that. And all of the pros and cons of using an mTurk sample anyway. So I've really liked where we've ended up.
Evan, would you have anything to add on to that?
We have a similar situation where, like, in order to get this done within one semester, we've got a pretty tight window where we have to collect the data during. And so I think it's usually like mid-March until mid-April. And several times I've had to do something where I give my class a not quite yet complete data set for them to use for all of their papers that they have to turn in that semester. But then for what we submit to CREP or use for like a poster or something later, we can wait to get the last batch of data and kind of incorporate a slightly larger data set, because it's just tricky trying to fit it in. And so we usually aren't still collecting when you get the worst offending procrastinators. but we're usually not ready for the most on the ball kinds of best participants who often get it done right at the beginning of the semester.
We've ended up posting ours on the department Sona, but also because of that end of the semester rush, we've sort of made the deadline a little bit early in the semester for Sona participation, just as a department thing, because theses are relying on them too. We will have students reach out to their contacts. A lot of our work is online. We picked a lot of studies that it could be done only online during COVID. And so the one thing I would emphasize, there are two points that I make about this. One of them is, if you don't end up hitting the target end, it's usually okay. Like, I've been pretty lenient about that. The original study that I think I was first author on was the Elliott et al. The target end was 37, and my site got 22 and was included in the data set. So I'd feel like a huge hypocrite if I were like, no, you didn't hit the target end. But also I think that disadvantages small teaching schools sometimes that don't have like the large. The other thing is, like, I will have students reach out to their contacts, but I also do like a no questions asked, and I encourage other people to do this as well. I don't require people to collect data from a certain number of participants. I think that opens us up to fraud from the students who are just kind of sort of filling it in last minute. I don't tie any points to like, well, if you get 400 participants, you'll get a bunch of extra credit, because I think that would do the same thing. If we have a perverse incentive structure in academia, like, points are kind of a perverse incentive structure for getting participants too, I think. So I would just encourage you to not maybe tie points to people collecting a certain number of participants in your class, unless you have a really sort of solid way of tracking to make sure. And I don't think IP addresses are helpful at all, because a lot of them send them to their friends who live on campus, and so you'll have everything on campus. And I'm happy to meet with you and talk to you about how to work that out and how to ensure just making sure that you have the number of participants you need. The real power is in when we combine all of our data together too. So unless we're doing stats that rely on having a certain N at a certain number of sites, like I generally think that that's okay. But it has been stressful for students to get up to their target N, I think, at times. So that's a problem that we've actively worked on in the past.
Have any of you I don't see any ethical problem with this, but it might be an interesting idea for the students to go personally to the general psych classes and maybe talk about their projects and maybe incentivize or create a personal contact. I don't know.
I think there's some real advantages to that. In as much as you can give them a flavor of what a thesis or dissertation data collection experience might be like, it's great when we can get that into the undergraduate experience. We've just got it happening on a scale where the level of disruption that comes with that and how much hassling these instructors get who are already doing us a favor, we've opted to not do that.
I had a bit of a tangential question, specifically when it comes to the extended hypotheses. I know like one aspect of, we even asked in icebreakers earlier, like if we're excited to do like DEI related like extension hypotheses. Does anything ever, I guess, come with that? So I guess with like how CREP works, of it picks a study or top studies that qualify. You have a class or a advisee or a mentee do it. They do it, and maybe they add their own like specific extended hypotheses. But like, is that ever like followed up on, or like are the extended hypotheses just, I guess for both of you, like just a teaching tool, but not necessarily something you all will ever like follow up on? Or is it, yeah, maybe that's my question of like what happens with those extended hypotheses if you do choose to run them? Or is it just primarily like a teaching tool to kind of increase students' interest, motivation? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can handle that. Oh, Devin, were you saying something too?
I was saying that's a great question, and I would also like to hear what you say about it.
I'm just going to give you such an academia answer and say it depends. So it can be whatever you want. And some people have set out to publish their extension hypotheses, and they've done that. And it's and then sometimes, so I'm working on writing up the Griscovicius, trying to say it correct, Griscovicius Going Green to Be Seen paper with Lily Lazarevic. And this study is like 10 years old. Some of you may be on the authorship team for that as well. So one of the things we do when we reach out to the original authors is we ask them if they have any ideas for any additional hypotheses or moderators. So one of the things that came back to us when we reached out to that author was, political party or ideology, and then also like to the extent that a country found choosing green products to be like trendy or fashionable or whatever, it could correlate more with. So we suggested those to teams, and enough teams did those that we are including those in the paper. So we have like a conservative liberal, we have a Republican Democrat. Other authors may not include those. I do think that people tend to present those a little bit more like their extension hypotheses. It can be either. It can be just a pedagogical thing. So when I supervise theses, and this is arbitrary, but for undergrad theses, they can do just a straight up direct replication. For master's theses, I like to require them to do some kind of extension, because I think that that's an important part of their skill. I think other instructors may require undergrad theses to include those as well. Again, like some classes have a requirement that you have an experimental hypothesis, and so they may add those. But it's not coordinated. To answer your question, it's not coordinated really on our end at all. If it is there when whoever writes up the paper writes it up, we'll include that. We're including a list of all of the extension hypotheses that all of the groups did, so that anybody who's looking at that data in the future can go and they can find that easily. And that's in our large processed data set, because some of them ask things like that no other team looked at, and that may be helpful to somebody else in the future. And as of right now, that's where it stands. I don't see that changing very much. So it's kind of like as much as I hate this word, we kind of like nudge them into like, here are some extension hypotheses you might do. Yeah. Does that answer your question? It's complicated.
Thank you. It does.
Oh, Ellen, can you speak to this for a second? They were upset by how the gender question was outdated in the original study.
Yeah, we did the Sparkman and Walton. It's a few years old, and the language that was used was considered offensive by today's standards. And so this being new, I was like, I don't know where I'm supposed to do the questions directly, but I asked the students, well, let's talk with the reviewers, and it became a small assignment for groups that were interested. How do you think that this should be worded? And then the class voted on it. So the students, one, I was paying attention to something they were concerned about. And then I said, there's an avenue, let's see if there's an avenue to talk about something that we value and think is important. And the reviewers were great with working with them. And so they really felt like they were a part of science.
I think that's such a great conversation to have. Part of what my students, we always end up talking about is what is a replication? What is a direct replication? I emphasize to them that we are replicating an effect. And so what are the crucial elements for replicating this effect? And what is the window dressing surrounding that showed up in this particular original study? And there's no black and white answer on any of those questions.
Do we have more questions lining up or anything somebody's on the fence about asking? It does not matter how small. This is, one of, go ahead.
Oh, it is small. So, sorry. Yeah, it is small, but I guess I'm curious with the replication. So my students, we did a direct replication, then I had them little work in little groups to do extension hypotheses, which was great. But a lot of them wanted to basically do just different studies that were kind of tangentially related, or like, this has the same word. We did study on awe and humility, which was fascinating. It was a great one for them to replicate. So I guess I'm wondering, in your experiences, whoever, do you tend to have students add a new independent or quasi-independent variable, add more of a dependent variable? Is there any recommendations, thoughts, experiences that you might be willing to share? Thanks.
So I've done kind of both things, where sometimes they'll think of additional predictors that might influence the outcome, or sometimes they'll think of other outcomes that might also depend on these predictors that we're already measuring. Or, I try and tell them that we're more interested in kind of potential moderators than just other predictors, so like everyone's like, with the vegetarian one, they're like, oh, well, I bet people who have pets might be more interested in being vegetarian. And it's like, well, yeah, but like that doesn't change anything about, the main thing we're studying. And so it'd be more interesting to think about which people are more or less sensitive to these dynamic norm messages, or, trying like, I feel your struggle of trying to get them focused on, like the main core idea and other details that will be relevant to that main core idea, instead of like vaguely related words. So I don't have a great answer for that, besides, when we just have a big discussion about all these things, and I just make fun of the students that say that. Just kidding. I'm very nice.
I think what you're doing, Devin, is, as far as I can tell, the best way to help them to have a successful extension. My approach, I think, discourages them from doing an extension in the first place. Jordan, I think it's still on the CREP page, the project plan Google document that I created. It's just this enormous list of questions, and it's based on the replication recipe, if you're familiar with that article. I tried to make it student friendly and just break it down into every little detail that my students needed to identify in the original study. What do they have from the article, from supplemental materials, from communication with authors, from the CREP team? What is missing, of what do they need in their execution of the study? And so half of that document is questions about the original, the other half is about their replication. And so where there's an opportunity for extension, they are required to identify their proposed extension, to justify it using literature, and then to create some either some simulation data or just some form of fake data that they can run a sample analysis on it. And that's just to sensitize them to how is this going to complicate things when you want to add this variable in this way. To speak to Devin's problem, I see this as a broader problem generally, just for my students understanding what their study is about. One of my biggest struggles is getting them to see that their study is about a particular concept that's being represented with this methodological context, and that it's not necessarily about, you know, what this scenario as it's presented to participants states, you know, but what really is the core conceptual idea that we're testing here. And so if we're extending that, then we need to be rooted in the core of what this study is about. If we're inspired and we take on a different core, that's not an extension anymore.
Thank you both.
Brady, I'm trying to track down the OSF page where all of this is. So I'm working on that in the background. If you have a quick link to it at some point, let me know and I'll put it in the
try
chat.
to dig that up.
Okay. Carol, I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying thank you. Appreciate it.
And I wanted to mention that in terms of like trying to fit projects into the timetable of a semester, like I'll be happy to share my syllabus and, you know, project overview and stuff like that with everybody.
I had kind of an additional question. So I know that like one of the questions were asked of like, how do we plan on like implementing this CREP? And it had like a variety of classes that we could implement it, and amongst many others, anywhere from like intro psych, stats, methods, an upper div, etc. Is there in cases where you're implementing this, and maybe you can remind like where you implement this in like a non-methods dedicated course or like a non-stats dedicated course, kind of like balancing. So like I'll be teaching several social psych courses in the fall, and so like I want to teach social psych, but I also want to have time dedicated for this. And I was just wondering, like, is there ever a struggle of like covering your core content area but still like implementing CREP where it's not like, I guess I don't know, of like time management or balance of, because it's sometimes I feel like a semester I just taught social psych this summer and I felt like I didn't have enough time to cover it when I wasn't doing anything additional, and I'm like, there's so many topics I already cut out. I'm not sure if that makes sense of like, is there a magic? Because I feel like if I did implement this, I would have to be like very careful of like what I choose for the core topic, and also give them a quality research experience as well, something that they can get like basically the outcomes that we all care about, student engagement, scientific literacy, and trying to like do something meaningful. So like having good teaching and good science at the same time. I'm not sure if my question makes sense, but like, is that a struggle or something that you've dealt with or juggled through for either of y'all?
Yeah. Definitely a core struggle with everything. So I feel like I keep talking first. Maybe I should let Brady talk first this time.
Sure. I'll say, so the time that you have in class and the time that your students devote to this, part of how you can modulate this is going to depend on how much you are going to take responsibility for and take control of. And so having maybe an advanced RA who's like your lead student on this, and you get little dips into that in your social psych class, you know, the level of involvement in the class, I think there's a lot of variability for what can be a CREP project. but there's still the limited resource of your time and your ability to do that. You're still teaching an entire social psych class. And so it depends on how much of that time you have to devote and how much support you have from, maybe a research assistant, a teaching assistant, to cover those things that are going to crowd out the other things that need to happen in your class.
Thank you.
Has anyone else incorporated this into like a content course? Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, but I took advantage of that. It was a hybrid course and the enrollment started at 128. And after too many years of overwhelming myself, I thought I'll be incremental this time. And so all students showed up at the beginning. I said, this is hybrid. Some of you wanted to sign up for the fully online course, but it was full. So you can still do that. But those of you that want a research experience, we're going to come to class 13 times and we're going to do a research experiment. So that worked, but that was keying off of the situation. And what I'm thinking about right now for next spring, when I do have it all face-to-face, because that's what we're going to be doing in the spring. I've been thinking about, I have the power, or at least I take the power of playing with the learning objectives. And so it's important for me to have this as a learning objective. If there's going to be a significant amount of in-class time and I don't cover things as much, I've shifted a lot of that to students doing their own time, and then we use in-class for inner teaching or areas that they have identified they're struggling with. But with an intro class, they're not expecting that. So that's a little tricky.
I thought about doing this in cognition when I teach cognition again. It's been a while. And we do have a few cognitive studies. And so the model I think that I will use when I end up teaching this is, I think it's important to me that in those content courses, they learn what types of tools the researchers use to build their knowledge base. And so, there's that, at least in the content courses I teach, there's always like that first part of the semester that's like, these are the important research concepts. So like in cognition, we talk a lot about within subjects research and like how we get our power from multiple trials, blah, blah, blah. And so I can like sort of tie that back in to the study we're going to do. But then what I planned on doing was, and again, this works in cog, but going through sort of every topic we go through, kind of link it back at the end to like, this is something that relates to this replication in the following way. So, we had a mind wandering study. We have a couple mind wandering studies, right? So one of the mind wandering studies, well, I can kind of tie that to perception and attention, because you have to be paying attention to something in order to be able to remember it later. And that leads into memory and and sometimes maybe the concepts don't clearly tie in. But just kind of keep coming back to it and reiterating those methodological things that stick out, again, like within subjects or, relating what we're doing to other studies we're learning about. Like now you kind of see how this works. I haven't actually done it, so I don't know how well it will work, but I would definitely encourage you to like not, rush into doing all the things your first semester as a faculty member. So there's a reason why I say that, because I have done that. So yeah, I have a plaque hanging on the wall behind me that one of my friends sent me for saying no to something that because it's so unusual. So
every dissertation advisor should give their student one of those the first time they say no.
Yeah, and that's from Crystal Steltenpole, which if you know Crystal herself should probably get plaques when she says no to things. So anyway.
When I was on clinical internship, I co-ran a therapy group for graduate students. And when we proposed setting boundaries with advisors, they could not even fathom the possibility of trying that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's rough. I think we have time for a couple more questions too, or if people just, want to jump in with their experiences running these. I know that I heard Brady mention bottlenecks, and I'm really interested in just what are all of the bottlenecks, because this is going to be, the focus of the teaching hackathon. But then again, like now that we're funded, I think we have a little bit more time to work on developing teaching materials. And we also, I think, will be applying for like another grant at some point. And so if getting enough participants is a bottleneck, like maybe part of the grant can be like money to distribute to student projects, so that they can collect enough participants to hit their end. So I'd like to hear about some of these from folks, if we don't mind going in that direction for a minute.
I can quickly elaborate on what I meant by my bottlenecks. For me, it's just any time that the progress of my study is in someone else's hands. So IRB and CREP reviewers were the two big ones. And that's part of what moved me out of CREP studies, at least for now, with my short semester. It's just unpredictable enough for us to hit the points we need to in the semester. You get to know your IRB and what to expect for that, whether you need to submit ahead of having students prepare answers to the questions and that sort of thing. But those have been my biggest obstacles, is when we're waiting on somebody else to sign off on something.
Yeah, and those are kind of the same time, so like I always try and rush to have people, read the study, do a quick lit review, and talk about extensions, so that I do this in the spring semester, and sometime like mid-February, maybe by like week 3 of the course, I'm trying to like put it in Qualtrics or PsychoPy or whatever, so that I can send it off to IRB and CREP, so that we have time to hear back from them before we start collecting the data, and then, have enough time to collect data, so that, so 2 ways I've given myself extra leeway with this is by sometimes giving students incomplete data sets to use for their analysis. So first of all, it could be nice to at least let them practice running analyses on even, only half full data sets, so that they can already see, okay, how do I run a t-test on this? Okay, get familiar with the data. And then hopefully we'll have enough data to like actually reach statistical significance before they have to submit their results sections and things. And then the other way I have a little more leeway is that I submit the final thing to CREP over the summer, like after, like that's not a thing that I make students do during the semester. And so that also kind of relieves some of that pressure.
Yeah, one advantage of CREP is that usually there's already a completed project out there with a data set that you can use, have real data for them to practice on.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Now it probably won't, if you do lots of extensions, it won't have any of those variables.
Right.
But if you don't, you're right. You could practice from day 1. You could show people, here's what your data might look like.
Yeah, and even there, you could simulate data for the extensions, just make sure they know that this isn't for dissemination when it's not real data.
I have a follow-up question, Devin, because I'm in that situation. The students finished all the semester requirements and their papers, but the data hasn't been submitted to CREP. And so theoretically, I could do that. If you will, please talk to me about what steps have to happen after that for either you or the students for them to get their completion certificates. I kind of feel like I'm missing if I were to do that, how would the students get the reward? They got their
Yeah.
stickers right now. I mean, they're all just thrilled about the sticker, but this could be even more.
Yeah, well, so I mean, my situation's a little weird because it's like it's really like my CREP project that my students are all kind of helping with, you know, and like I'm the one that's filled out all the CREP forms and stuff, and so it's different than when you have groups where the students are more in charge of communicating with CREP and all of those things. So I emailed some of my best students, and one of them right now is trying to type up the discussion thing to submit it to CREP and do the kind of final check. If you have motivated enough students, I could picture being able to count on them to tie up those loose ends over the summer. But if you don't, then that could definitely be a hard thing where, you know, a student team never reaches completion.
That was the biggest problem that I had with students being at the helm of CREP projects. The semester would end before those T's were crossed and I's were dotted. And, you know, I think that the way you're doing it is the ideal way to do a CREP project, really. If the faculty member is in a position to really usher it through the process and make sure that those quality points are happening.
I'm hesitating to go off mute because they're doing construction under my office. Do you hear that? It's like a very, very loud drill.
Nope, can't hear it.
Okay. Yes, noise cancellation works. Well, it is just about 12:30. And so I think it's now time for another break. Okay. I think we have a long break. So we wanted to give folks time for lunch or dinner. I don't know what time it is. I went to Italy for the SIPS conference and I'm in all the time zones still mentally. So if any of you have follow-up questions, you know, please drop them anytime. I can communicate them with Brady and Devin. I just wanted to say thank you so much for both of you for coming here and chatting with us and sharing your experiences. I think it's really helpful to hear from people who have so much experience. So thank you. You're both free to leave.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you so much. See you again soon, hopefully.
Yep.
And for the rest of you, I'm going to pause recording again. I may just turn it off and then record since we have a half-hour break. Yeah. That looks like a really good cup of coffee, Dana. It's like you have the saucer. Yeah.
It is an Americano
Mm-hmm.
it's actually half and half decaf and regular because I don't have the tolerance for caffeine that I used to.
That's exactly my coffee of choice, the half calf Americano. So my graduate assistant called me basic for it, so I'm just passing that along to you. Do what you want with that.
What would they say about straight espresso?
Good. That is good. That is fine.
So
okay. Yeah.
Just don't add water to it.
Right. So okay, so I want to bring us into the list of available studies to go over, and I'm going to show you where you can find that list that I plan on updating regularly. We're still kind of in the middle of finding available studies for this next round. We have quite a few right now, but some of them have closed down just because we have a ton of data, and we have hopes of writing them up at some point. Now, as I've mentioned, the writing up of these studies, which we're going to talk about that during the summer, like what the process is for writing things up. But a lot of it kind of depends on if we have a reasonable first author in mind for studies. And the paper that's like, here's the CREP, isn't this a cool pedagogical thing, is like, that's been written, right? So now the focus is on that content, it's on that particular effect and what it can contribute to our understanding of those effects. But it's hard for us to find first authors to do those. And then it's kind of hard for us to work on those timelines. So I think we'll probably be shifting to more of a data paper type approach, where when we have when our studies close out, we just start working right away on the data paper and submit it to like the Journal of Open Psychology Data or whatever it's called. I think that seems like a pretty good option. So just keep that in mind for some of these. I'm going to sort of give us a little tour of the CREP website, which I'm working on building a little bit more right now. Here you can find some really helpful links. So the external links that we have are the step-by-step guide to completing a CREP project, which is also a good place to start for people. Our CREP home on the Open Science Framework. Here's the description of available studies. I also want you to know you're in the summer workshop now, but we also have this conference coming up, which I think some of you are registered for already. CREPECon, it's our first year of doing this. I don't know that my website's actually working, so that's kind of embarrassing, but we'll get through this together. Maybe it's just slow. But if you have a chance to look up, the schedule and what's going on, I said that registration closed, but you can still register for this. We don't have a ton of presentations, but we do have a couple speakers. We have John Gray coming to talk about CREP. Oh, here's the registration form. And here's the actual schedule. We have a poster session on GatherTown where students are presenting, and you can see who is presenting. There are some cool things being presented, including replications from the CREP Africa project. And so Amanda has some presentations here. Thank you, Amanda, for populating our program. I think we have a couple others to add on here as well. We also have the first CREP assistant giving a presentation. We have a career panel where panelists will talk about careers that involve research for students, and then we'll have a 20-minute presentation on incorporating CREP into your courses, which you hopefully will be a little bit more of an expert on by then. But if you'd like to come, it's totally free. And it could be kind of a neat way to see things that your students could be doing next year. So not sad that it's small this year, because I think that gives us a nice little pilot year to really figure out, what we want to improve for the following year. So all of that is on this CREP main page. And let me bring you to this list of available studies. Oh, I'm glad your students are excited. I'm excited too. So if you click on description of available studies, you will come across this CREP study options Google slide presentation. And I don't know why I hit that. Let me make that go away. Slideshow, that's what we want to do. I updated this most recently in January 2023. We haven't had any new studies since then. We have ended a couple. So we have ended the Sparkman and Walton. It was time. We have, if I had to guess, probably like 10,000 participants in that one at this point. You can always see the options that are available by clicking on this link. And then you can also find all the materials here. When we have our next workshop, which is next Wednesday, we are going to break into groups and kind of act like we're students. Well, you are, I'm not. And pick a study, go through the process of what it's like to pick a study, work through the steps in the OSF page. I think this is going to be really helpful to us because it's like, well, we'll have fresh eyes on what are the things that might get people caught up. What are those bottlenecks? So you will pick one of these studies that you want to do together with your group members and start, putting them together like you're doing a mock project. And okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of these and highlight, what the different characteristics of each are, so you have a good sense. This is exactly what I do with my classes too. When I let them vote on their projects, I prepared this set of PowerPoint slides for my class, and then added a little bit to it. Sometimes I will take options out. So if I only want them to choose from, 4 different studies, I'll take the rest of them out. But I did not do that with this one. I let them really pick any of them. So I'm going to start with the Near and Mockery. This is one of our, by the way, if you know any of these authors and I'm saying their names wrong, please tell me and spell it phonetically in the chat, because I have no idea. So this study is interesting because it's on our new submission and reviewer system on Forma. So students sign on to this learning management system, request an account, and all of their sort of work gets done through that and the OSF. So when they're done preparing their OSF page, they upload a link to that learning management system. Their reviews get done on there. It's hopefully going to be a system that we can use in the future for reviews as well. The quick overview of the findings. So this is, and again, a lot of these papers, we only, there are multiple studies in the paper, but we only picked one for students to replicate. Usually, a lot of times it ends up being study 1. Sometimes it's not, like study 1 might be a pilot. It might not be the focal, what we consider the focal effect, or it may be sometimes the focal effect study. So if we have a paper that has like 11 studies in it, sometimes like study 3 will be the one that's easiest for students to replicate, or we consider that to be the most interesting. So that's part of our decision making on that. What we found in this paper, the authors found that participants would rate the protagonist of an event as deserving more punishment when the event resulted in an unlucky outcome, compared to the same event with a different protagonist and a lucky outcome. So in this case, it was, and this, I always give a content warning on this one. The unlucky vignette describes a child's death. And so sometimes I don't give this, like to my graduate students, I don't often give this as an option. Very few people vote on this one. Once I say that as well. So in one vignette, in both vignettes, there's a child standing in the bathtub. The person watching them answers the phone. And you can imagine in the lucky outcome, nothing happens to the child. In the unlucky outcome, something does happen to the child. And then participants rate how much punishment the protagonist deserves, and how, like, I believe in how wrong they are, how much blame they deserve, and how much they also rate their permissibility. And I forget exactly what that means. It can be run online. There are 100 participants required. Again, we're pretty lenient on that. It's a pretty quick study, so 100 usually isn't a problem. When I send I can have a really small class of students. When they send it out to people they know, we'll get 200 or 300 participants back if it's a quick study. Even if it's a small class, there are just people who just spam their social media with these links. The stats is a repeated measures ANOVA, so that can be a little advanced for students sometimes. There could be IRB issues because of the sensitive content. So that is a potential problem that I flagged. They did conduct a lot of replications of this effect within their paper, which I think is kind of neat. I think the paper does have something like 7 or 8 studies. And it could be, so this could be a really good opportunity for extension hypotheses as well. And it's, it is sort of interesting. And one of the things some of my students liked about it was that it's not the type of thing that people usually think of in a 200 level class as being like, oh, this is psychology. It's like a little bit of, sort of maybe experimental philosophy. It's a little bit of stuff that's like sort of everyday experiences and judgments we make about people. Here's sort of a summary of the vignettes and the types of questions they get. And I kind of just tried to throw things together so people could get a sense of like what they were studying, what they found. They read both vignettes in a specific order, one with the lucky outcome and one with the unlucky outcome, and then rate their wrongness, blameworthy, permissibleness, and punishment. And they found, I think, differences in how much the participants or how much the protagonists should be punished in particular. And when I'm presenting this to my, to my students, when I'm presenting these, like, this gives us a little bit of a chance to talk about counterbalancing, because they didn't counterbalance these, and to talk about confidence intervals. So I'll like hit on some concepts as we're going through these that we'll talk about in context as well. I always open it up for questions about the study when I'm talking to my students. I have not refreshed my memory on these in a long time. So if you have questions as we go through, let me know. We can try to track down the answers together. Okay, so this is our second study. I have actually done this, and it was rough. And I will explain that in a little bit more detail. So this one we may talk about a little bit when we talk about DEIA-related extension hypotheses. In this study, I think there are like 11 studies in this one. The authors found that when people were given the choice between thinking about other people's experiences, empathetically, like how that person was feeling versus how they looked, participants tended to choose to avoid empathy. They reported empathy as being more effortful. And then in follow-up studies, they, I believe, sort of centered around like empathy is uniquely cognitively difficult. So the title of the paper is, I think it's like one of those titles, : rest of title. And the beginning is empathy is hard work. So this can be run online. It will be a lot easier with Qualtrics. If you have the version of Qualtrics that has the timer on it. But I do have a package put together for SOSI survey. Have any of you heard of SOSI survey before? So it's an online, it's sort of in that school like JS Psych, Lab.js, Form R, like online, free, open types of programs. SOSI survey it can be a little clunky when you're using it, but once you kind of get used to it, it's a little bit easier. So it doesn't have quite the user interface that like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics has, but it's a lot more customizable. And you can write like JavaScript and stuff like that to run in the background. But there are 40 trials. Let me see if I get into the problems with this. Okay, there are 40 trials. And in each, you see one of 40 random photos of what they referred to in the paper as child refugees. And this led to some really interesting discussions in my class, because when we went and we looked at the materials, it was pictures of sad African children. And all of the children were children of color. When I did a reverse image search on these images, they were not labeled as refugees. So this was like it was a really interesting discussion with my class that like the stimuli were very limited. The way the original authors may have found the stimuli could have been problematic. And I have a lot of students of color, and being a white person, the way I didn't want to keep this from them as an option. This is the study they ended up choosing, which blew my mind. But I let them vote on it before I gave them the presentation. I had them read the slide summaries, and so I didn't get to give them this context. I have my students do weekly reflections where they summarize like what work they did, what work they plan on doing, any obstacles that got in their way, try to stay as judgment-free as possible. So I added a question onto this week's reflection when they picked the study that was just like, this will stay between us. Do you have any concerns about this study? Do you have recommendations? Do you, I like soliciting their advice on this. Ran it through my VP of DEI to see what his thoughts were. And they largely were very excited about doing the study and thought that the stimuli were sort of a problem, but didn't see them doing the study as being an endorsement of this. And what they really liked was that and there was a handful of people who said this, there was nobody who said straight up, like, I don't want to have anything to do with this study. So that was good. But one of the things I said when I presented this was, when you write your paper up, the discussion is a place where you can get into the problems you see with these stimuli, and you could potentially contribute that to the eventual paper as well. And they really liked that idea. They liked the idea that they could address that themselves. Yeah, so the analyses I'm kind of running through now, and I think that this is a little misleading. I'm wrapping up my sites analysis. So it's 40 stimuli, and after each stimulus, they have to choose ahead of time if they want to describe what they see in the next picture, describe the physical appearance of the person, or say how they feel. And they have to stay on each screen, I think, for like 10 or 15 seconds. And so it takes a long time to do this survey. And then there's some other scales at the end. It takes about 30 or 40 minutes. So it took us a long time to get our 56 participants. And we had huge attrition. A lot of people stopped the survey halfway through. They're just looking at pictures of sad kids for a long time. And it's like, I don't know, it was rough. So I say 56 participants are required. That is true. If there's less than that or fewer, totally fine. But I also say in here that it's a one sample t-test, and that's kind of mostly true. There is also an analysis that looks at how they started, that looks at time course as a variable. And so you have to sort of take all of the trials and put them back in order to see if they chose describe or empathy based on the time. And so I have script to do that now. If you end up doing this study, I have a SOSI survey study that's all prepared to go that you could import and run for free and collect data on. And I could meet with you and show you how to do that. And I also have our markdown script that will like help you put that data into time course data. And do all of the analyses and stuff too. So I just only had my students do the t-test bits for their papers because no, they don't, just no. But I have another student from that class actually who really wanted to be involved in the study and get authorship and stuff. Like, she's been meeting with me regularly to work through the R markdown and sort of learn it. And that's been really nice. I'm trying to think if I missed anything big with this paper. Are there any questions so far?
Jordan,
Okay.
I don't have a question about the specific study, but you've mentioned SOSI, which I've never heard of. Do you have a link to
I
that?
do.
I've been trying to Google while you're talking.
Yes, it is. One of the things you should know is that it is a German website. So they have everything in English, but like every once in a while you'll see just like one word that's like in German. It's SOSI, SOSCI. Here, let me copy this and put it in the chat. Survey.de. And then I don't think that's my actual password. I've had to reset my password a bunch of times, but once you're in it, there are a series of projects that are all set up, and they have tutorials that I think work pretty well. And if you have to customize surveys, I'm not a coder or anything like that. Like, I probably have more skills than I did 10 years ago, but anytime I needed to code something, like I would just ask ChatGPT, like, how do I write JavaScript that will let me have a timer? And how do I implement that in SOSI survey? And sometimes it was right and it would help me. And other times it was not. And I would go back and yell at ChatGPT and it would say, I'm sorry, try this. was a whole thing. But I think it's really helpful. There are other options like Form R, I think is really good. I think Lab.js, any of these free programs there's gonna be a learning curve with them. But I found SOSI Survey to be kind of the best for me. There's also like SciToolkit and Pavlovia, and I don't know. There are others where like Gorilla, where you have to pay for participants. You don't have to pay with SOSI Survey. Other questions?
My students have been successful with SciToolkit.
Yep. I've gotten into it a couple times, and then something has made me give up. But that is probably my impulsivity more than anything else. So, okay. Devin has done this one. We haven't had a lot of people participate in this one, which means it may take a while for us to collect data. So, and I'm not a personality psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, so I may get some of this wrong. The summary, I struggled to write this, was that individual differences can be viewed through the lens of fundamental social motives framework. And I believe that theory purports that the purpose of motivation is to manage social outcomes. So there is a ton of data that gets collected with this survey. There are lots of questionnaires. It's long, and then there's a lot of like analyses, tables, and stuff. I think that this is a great fit for somebody interested in personality, who's interested in big data sets, who is interested in sort of writing more technical reports, but also thinking about theory, because this is one of the theory-based papers. It can be run online. We do have a Qualtrics. We asked for 100 participants. I should start saying we ask for instead of required. There are some more complex statistical analyses, and there are a ton of variables. But that can be fun too, because, what I really like about those is it really lets me hammer home the difference between planned and exploratory analyses. Because usually, after talking about the replication crisis for a while, my students will be sometimes nervous to do exploratory analyses. And so it's nice to have data sets where I can just say like, no, it's okay, get in here and just look at whatever, just be clear that's what you were doing, right? Just tell people that's what you were doing. Okay, and yes, I think that this might be all make sense for a close, this one might make sense for a close relationships class. I have no idea what sociometer theory is, but that sounds like a reasonable thing to be related.
Well, it basically says that self-esteem serves as an indicator of whether we're being good people, I think.
Oh.
And so the motivation when we feel low self-esteem is to improve our social standing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and
maybe Mark Leary did that. I don't remember. It's a little hazy right now.
It's hazy for me always because I have no idea. But yeah, so this is good to know that this might be good for a close relationships class. And I can maybe add that, maybe add some suggested content courses to these. Okay, my lab is also working on right now as well. This is not a great lower level class study. I don't think. We're working on it very slowly. We are doing this in person too, because I want my lab researchers to have experience running participants in person. So this study, they found that so they showed they're interested in misinformation effects, and it's a study on fake news and the illusory truth effect. So they were looking at participants, how accurate they perceived news stories to be, and they found that when they had participants read fake news headlines, they were just as likely, based on that one exposure, to perceive them as accurate, just having seen them before, compared to fake news stories that they hadn't seen before. And this is even when they were labeled as disputed by third-party fact checkers. And then there were effects based on the person's political ideology. And so, like, people who identified as Democrat were more likely to say that things were that were negative fake news about Republicans or about Trump, was more likely to be accurate. And then when participants were not aware of having seen them before, they still found this effect, even if they didn't remember having seen it. So really interesting, leads to a lot of conversations. There are, the original stimuli are from the 2016 election. So there are like lots of stories about Hillary Clinton and Mike Pence and Donald Trump. So just be aware that, you know, people may have opinions that they may talk about. I felt comfortable running this in my lab because it's a pretty, you know, it's a pretty open and honest space. But, you know, just be aware. So it can be run online. The original study used Lab.js, so we got that and adapted it, and there were like some coding things that were required. We asked for 100 participants. It is huge experimental. So if you have experimental needs, there's also cognition, there's also, you know, judgment, there's also political ideology. So I think there are a lot of things that students get interested in with things like this. The design is a mixed design. So there is one between subjects variable, and that is the disputed, I'm pretty sure the disputed by third-party fact checkers. Some of the photos, some of the stories are labeled with that, some of them aren't. So you either had all of those labeled that way or not. And there are other things within there that are randomized, and I forget what those are right now. But it's summarized nicely on the CREP page. And then the stats are t-tests and ANOVAs, but the ANOVAs are mixed ANOVAs. So be aware of that. But some of the so some of these are, you know, the students may be able to do the t-tests, and you may be able to like do the ANOVA and then sort of show them the results and walk through it with them, which I think is great. But that's just my opinion. So who knows? I don't have any data to support that that's great. Here are some examples of the types of news stories. So some people would get this disputed by third-party fact checkers. So here, this is a fake news story that they might have exposure to, that is negative. There's like negative Democrat, negative Republican, positive Democrat, and positive Republican. Some people have added new stimuli to these, since these are now 7 years old.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure my students would know who Hillary Clinton is.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not sure all of my students knew who Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So, you know, it happens. And then I had some of these like this was fresh on my mind when I presented this before to my students, because my lab had just done it, but I like to try to include like the main findings and kind of walk through. My students seem to really like it, and I got weekly feedback from them again on like what went well that week, what was interesting. they tended to like it when I walked through tables, because they would get like a little bit more literacy on like what these tables mean. So I included this. These are the politically concordant. So, you know, if you are a Democrat, politically concordant news stories would be positive Democrat and negative Republican. And discordant would be the opposite. And then these are means of, I think, how accurate they thought the news stories were from, God, I forget what the number means. Yes, I think it is how accurate, if they think the news story is accurate or not. So if they are familiar with the study, they have no warning, it's fake news, they're more likely, so 1.93 compared to 1.78, they're more likely to say it's accurate. It's from the olden days, yes. Okay. Here is one of our current mind-wandering studies. This one is a hoot. So the authors of this study, their goal was to differentiate between intentional and unintentional mind wandering. So it blows my mind that people can intentionally mind wander, but I guess that this is a real construct. That if you're doing something kind of boring and you're like, this is boring and I kind of want to think about something else to pass the time, that would be intentional mind wandering. And unintentional mind wandering would be literally what's happened to me 17 times in the past minute, probably, where you're just, you know, you lose track of the task without wanting to. And so they had participants in this case do a SART task. I forget what SART stands for. It's like, ooh, I'm going to look at Jared, but I'm not sure Jared remembers either.
Oh, I put it in the chat. I think it's sustained attention to response task.
Okay, cool. So they're assigned to one of two different conditions, and then one condition, it's the easy SART, and then the other condition is the hard SART, which my students have just giggle every time they say hard SART. And I kind of know why. Anyway, so in the easy condition, they get 900 trials of the digits 1 through 9 in order, and they have to hit a button and every time a 3 pops up. So you know when the 3 is coming. That's what makes it easy. And then the hard SART, they have 900 trials where they get it in random order, but it's like within the block of 20. So they have the blocks of 20. It's not just 900 random trials. It's like they have 45 blocks of 20 in random order. So you wouldn't end up getting like all of your 3s up front. I'm hoping that this is making sense. So it's 1 through 20, 45 times random in random order within each block. And that's a little tricky to program. We were using Open Sesame for this, but I think that it was difficult. I think we have somebody who has programmed this. So the old executive reviewer on this, Mike Andrachik, I think Jared's the current executive reviewer, right? So the old executive reviewer had a version that's available online that people can use now. Anyway, so in this hard version, they also have to hit 3 whenever they see it, but it's like all in random order. So on one of these, it's like incredibly boring. And I walked through both of these when my student did it as a thesis, and it was like my kryptonite. It was a terrible, both of them were awful in their own ways. But if you're looking at this and you're like, these sound awful, they are. And it really makes it, what I liked about presenting this to my class was like thinking about the attrition, the differential attrition from these two conditions, and what that might look like for the participants who are left and how they might be different from the participants who remained all the way till the end. So yes, so it can be run online. I do think we have that online version ready. We asked for 100 participants. The stats are fairly easy on this one, which makes it attractive. Most of my students don't end up voting for this one, even when I sound excited for it, which surprised me because I would have thought that they all would have loved mind wandering, but yes. Anyway, here's the mind wandering task. And when the participants are doing the task, they're asked at random intervals whether they were on task, intentionally mind wandering, or unintentionally mind wandering. And people tend to intentionally mind wander more, I guess was the original finding, when they're doing the easy task. Just like, get me out of this mental cage. Okay. Oh, and here's the summary of the findings. This was, I included this graph here because it was a nice little bar graph to show my students an interaction. Like we had just covered interactions very briefly, just in like a literacy kind of a way. And so I wanted to show them like, this is, you know, an interaction. And this is the proportion of time they spend mind wandering. And yes. So they did more intentional mind wandering during the easy start condition. And look at all this unintentional mind wandering during the difficult one. Okay. This one is the one that I think Carol talked about earlier, the awe and humility. And my undergrad class voted on this one this past semester. My grad students are the ones who voted on the Cameron et al., which I was grateful for because I think they did a good job with that. In this study, participants, so the authors were interested in just awe as a construct, which makes it kind of a neat paper for the students to read when you're talking about like what a construct is and how it's operationalized. Because the introduction spends a lot of time on like, what exactly is awe? Like, is it unique? Does it have benefits? And really wrestles through that question. The writing is a little dense. This is also where I do my demo of like, if you're having a hard time reading a paper because it's very jargony, I have my students, I feel like I'm a shill for ChatGPT, but I have them take the paragraphs from the paper and copy and paste them into ChatGPT and ask like, can you please, you know, rewrite this for a general audience? And they really appreciated that with this paper in particular. They had participants randomly assigned to watch one of two different 2-minute videos. In the control group, they say it's how to build a fence, but it's really a retaining wall. And then in the awe-inducing video, it's a video about the universe and stars and planets, and they like pull up all of these like planets and they show like the next biggest planet, and they go all the way from like Earth to like the giant, you know, red dwarf or whatever the biggest things are. And there's this music that's like very, I don't know, Trans-Siberian Orchestra kind of. So what they found was participants who watched the awe video. So they had participants write for 2 minutes. This is another one where you have to have a timer. First about their strengths and their weaknesses. And again, if you do this, I have a SOSI survey put together that you could import and use. Imagining that they would discuss these personal qualities with the person they just met. And then they had 2 coders who I put blind to condition in quotation marks to say like that's what they, now we tend to use language masked instead of blind, but that's what the original paper said. They counted the number of strengths and weaknesses mentioned by each participant. I have a little bit more insight into the study now, and I'm gonna speak to this in a second. It can be run online. Again, I have a version of this. We asked for 100 participants. The stats are t-test with log transformation, which was so much fun to explain to 200 level research methods and stats students. because for me, it's like, yeah, I kind of like know what that is, but I like what, you know, I had one student who really wanted to understand a log transformation. And I was like, I am not your woman. This is where you will Google things. So, because it's like one of those things I can conceptualize, but it's like, I'm not prepared to explain that to you. We spent some time excluding participants. What's nice about it is it's a really easy experimental manipulation that can be done. I know stats explaining would be handy. And if you have a requirement in your department to do, like, they need an experimental thing, this is your study. It does require coding of open-ended responses, which I found as a perk. And let me tell you, these were so messy. The original study, I think, may have been done on MTurk, where, like, I just think participants may have taken it, they may have read the instructions, I don't know. They asked first strengths and then weaknesses. That was not counterbalanced. And so that was a huge conversation too. The strengths, a lot of people just wouldn't write about their weaknesses at all. I don't know if they ran out of time or what, but they just didn't. A lot of them like listed things that we had these conversations about that we were like, are these strengths or weaknesses? So one of them was like sensitivity to cold was listed as a weakness. And I don't think that that's really what we had in mind. Like when we thought about weaknesses, it was just a really interesting like demonstration of this is how people will interpret things you give them. And then a lot of them like did the whole weaknesses as strengths thing. Like my friends say I am too punctual, or I am, you know, too hardworking was listed as a weakness a lot of the time. And it just made the research really difficult because it was like a very garbage in, garbage out kind of a thing. Like if we don't know how to categorize different strengths and weaknesses, then, you know, that's really going to make this difficult. So we had coders coding these as a class. I like that they got that experience, but a lot of them disagreed on the numbers of strengths and weaknesses. Reliability was still okay. So, you know, that's good, but it wasn't great. I think this is the last one. Yes. My class has also done this one before too. A while ago, this was one of the studies that we picked during COVID. It's a 2017 paper. So we would have started looking for these papers at the beginning of 2020. So we actually did one whole round of coding papers and then started over again so we could focus on papers that could be done online. In the study, and we used study one, the authors measured socioeconomic status and depression. Depression is measured by the CESD-10, I think. Is that a thing? Okay, somebody's nodding. That makes me feel better. And found that was moderated by cognitive reappraisal ability. This one is a super fun one to talk to my students about because it blows their mind. They think it's interesting because they think depression is interesting. They think SES is interesting. They think we have a lot of future counselors and they think that cognitive reappraisal is interesting. They had a lot of problems with the paper that surprised me. And again, these were my students. They might not be yours. SES was like measured by income, which was a mess for college student participants. Like, and it also was like they had 10 categories of income. So we got to talk about that. They did not like the depression scale. I tried to not have an opinion about it, but one of the things we talked about in class early in the semester was like, if any of you have seen Iko Fried's like wheel of different depression scales that all have like different symptoms that they address, we had talked about that in like a jingle jangle lecture that I had given at one point. And so I think they had an eye on like, well, is this a good depression scale? And like, I don't really know, but a lot of people use it. A lot of people use it in research. So, and then I really struggled with how the authors talked about SES and cognitive reappraisal. They found that, so the title of the paper is Change the Things You Can. And they really sort of narrowed in on it was a really lively discussion on, recommending individual solutions to systemic issues, and sort of wondering out loud. What I thought was really interesting was the students really emphatically wondered out loud how much experience the authors of this paper had with low SES individuals because of the types of language that was used in the paper. And I don't know the answer to that, but that could be a totally unfair question. I mean, it was a question being raised, right? And their assumptions could be totally unfair. I couldn't speak for the authors, but it did lead to a discussion of people studying populations that they don't know that much about, and what the advantages are of having people on your research team who are from those populations, and having reviewers who are from those populations, and how that's not something that happens very often. So and again, I'm more focused on the types of discussions that these studies can allow you to have with your students. I guess that's probably pretty obvious, than what the results are. So this one can be run online. We do ask for 100 participants. The stats are regression. The regression analysis is not that bad. There's a simple slopes analysis that you need to do that I think we have the code for it in R. I don't know if we have it in other places, and I don't know exactly how to, I kind of struggled with how to make the graph here, but I also didn't persist very far when I tried to do it as well. So I don't think it would be that miserable. And with any of these, if you pick them and you're struggling on how to do this stuff, just send me a message. And if the executive reviewer can't help, I kind of like sitting around and trying to figure out how to do these types of things. Yes, Jessie.
So a question that the simple slopes makes me think about is, in doing these replications, if analysis standards have changed, right? So moderation, I don't teach simple slopes because we don't I don't teach simple slopes anymore. That's just not the way that we do this. And so would you still be looking for the students to run the simple slopes analysis in order to do the replication?
You can do this in different ways. I think that, I would feel comfortable. So when I ran this, I had a GA for the class who took the lead on the analyses. This is probably one where I would do that analysis myself and have them do the regression themselves after we go through the regression. I actually walk them through all of the analyses in my class because I just don't think they're quite there yet at either level. Some of them do go off and try it on their own. It's tough to find a paper that only has t-tests and z-tests, and so if I can find a paper that has one type of analysis the students can do on their own, I kind of like that. And then one of the teaching resources I think I really want to work on building up is having videos for each paper where we have a data set or a simulated data set, and we walk through, this is how you analyze this data and this is the output. Because even, a mixed ANOVA is that takes a lot for me. I don't use those, and it takes a long time to sit down and think through how do I do that? And so I think I'd like to have those as teaching resources for folks at some point.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
For this one in particular, did you all make changes in terms of SES and college students? Or did you just like go for it and measure it and like say it's kind of accurate?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So for the direct replications, we always ask that people use exactly the original stuff.
Okay.
But we had an extension hypothesis on one of these. And we started testing. So because this was COVID, we didn't end up finishing, but we started testing like a sort of a separate question, getting at SES, which was sort of like a 2-question, what is your safety net? And we generated these, I think, in my lab, where like we would ask the participants, like, if you had a $500 traffic ticket that you had to pay or risk going to jail, what is the likelihood that you could get that $500 within the next like 24 hours? And then there was another one that was like $5,000, just to sort of see where they felt, to try to validate those for college students, but because we just couldn't find really the best way to ask people, what we were trying to get at here, which was, and then SES was like more than just financial resources, right? But they asked about money. So yes, that could be a good extension hypothesis, but no, we don't mess with any of the original. There are a couple cases where we have messed with the original. So there was an old study that we did looking at illusory conjunctions. Am I using the right words? The
illusory correlations.
The illusory, like, if you know that somebody is Swiss, you'll think they're a skier, blah, blah, blah. And that was one of the things in the original study, but because people were doing it in different countries, like they changed it to like Canadian and hockey player, or in the partner project we did with the PSA, we had a vignette where people saw cows in a field, and like the Chinese teams changed that to water buffalo. So just like if there are cultural things that are like, well, I'm running this and like this doesn't really make sense, like we might make small changes, but we leave the original stimuli intact, and maybe add more participants with a different measure, or add a different measure at the end, to try to compare those two. That's a good extension hypothesis. That's a really good question. So this is actually what we have right now, and we're working on selecting studies for the next round, and we'll hope to have that done pretty soon. But it's likely that they won't be live for fall. It's likely they'll be live for January. And there actually is like a public Google sheet where you can code these studies and you can enter them in. And I will send that along to you if you want to take a look at that. And I can answer any additional questions in the meantime.
Kind of just a curiosity process question. Will the ongoing studies that like aren't new, will they be moved over to the LMS, like the new LMS? Like what's the timeline for those getting like migrated? Or
yeah,
is it mostly just for the new ones?
I think we're going to do it mostly for the new ones. Cool. We haven't decided yet. Because we kind of want people to be able to finish out what they're used to before learning a new thing. So we kind of want to get a sense of like, what's the learning curve on Forma. If you have strong opinions about that, please let me know. Or mild opinions. So I just sent you a link if you have students who might want to help with coding these papers. There's a list. It's helpful if they have a library where they can find these papers, but you can see how many coders each paper has already. We would like to have at least 3 or 4 on each one. We will have some peer mentors be doing this for us in the fall, but I mean, the more coding, the better. And I think it is interesting for students to do this with an eye on like what would be feasible to collect data on. So yes, they also can rate how interesting they think they are, because that is apparently not something that you want the executive team making decisions about, is what we think the students will think is interesting. It's like that it ends up being like that Steve Buscemi speaking slang meme. Yeah, it's open to grad and undergrad students, and we've had faculty members code as well. So anybody who has an interest in procrastinating can use this as a way to do that. So for sure, graduate students. Me, sometimes I get in there and I just, oh, you're welcome. We've never picked a study from there because they're all like either longitudinal or the participants are minor children, and so we don't choose those, but it's still there. So maybe someday.
Another good developmental journal is Applied Developmental Psych. Sometimes is a little bit less like pie in the sky developmentally. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yep. All right, making a note of that, because we probably should reevaluate which journals we're pulling from at some point. So this brings us to the end of the day. I'm going to stop recording and